Hello, everyone. I'm George Papanikolaou, the program leader for the Common Fund Data Ecosystem. On behalf of our program team, I welcome you all to today's webinar and the Notice of Funding Opportunity Announcement, OTA 23004. This announcement was issued to invite applications to establish the Data Resource Center and the Knowledge Center for the NIH Common Fund Data Ecosystem. We will refer to the Common Fund Data Ecosystem as CFDE in the remainder of the presentation. This research opportunity announcement, that is a ROA, was released on March 28th. Next slide. Today, our program management team will briefly describe the ROA and go over and highlight some of its key points. We will then have a question and answer session for the remainder of the hour. Please post your questions to the chat box. Our team will address as many questions as possible during the webinar. If we cannot get to all the questions, we will follow up with the attendees who posted them to address them. If they relate to a broader audience, some of the questions asked and the answers to them will be posted on our fact pages. Again, this will be done anonymously and will not include your names. Next slide. Let us start with a brief outline of the ROA. Next slide. First, a little background on CFDE. CFDE is currently in its pilot phase, or phase 1. It has been in existence for about 4 years. During the pilot phase, CFDE consisted of a coordination center and a number of data coordination centers of various Common Fund programs. We call the later DCCs. The CFDE Coordinating Center was responsible for the technical and logistic coordination of the CFDE Consortium, and it has been setting up the CFDE portal. The portal includes a searchable catalog of metadata about the data sets of the engaged Common Fund programs. This catalog was created by ingesting the standard metadata provided by the DCCs using a metadata model that is called the Crosscut Metadata Model, or C2M2. The CFDE Coordinating Center was also responsible for training and outreach for the consortium. The DCCs of the engaged Common Fund programs participate in the ecosystem by contributing the metadata about their data sets to the portal. The DCCs also partner with each other and the Coordinating Center in activities geared towards harmonizing and integrating data sets, developing new ways to make the data sets and other digital resources interoperable. During the pilot phase, the number of engaged DCCs doubled from 6 to 12. We expect the size to grow even more in the next phase. Next slide, please. What is the planned structure for CFDE for the next phase? That is phase 2. The primary structural challenge will be with the CFDE Coordination Center. In the next phase, rather than having a single center handle a wide variety of coordination and integration, there will be 5 interconnecting centers with their specific focus areas. This role will support the founding of the Data Resource Center and the Knowledge Center. We will briefly describe these in the following slides. In addition to these two, a Cloud Workspace Implementation Center will support cloud computing activities in select cloud workspaces. The Center for Training will coordinate the training centers of the CFDE Consortium. Lastly, the Integration and Coordination Center will support integrating CFDE-related activities among the centers and participating DCCs. This center will also coordinate the sustainability and evaluation activities. Roles of the engaged DCCs will remain mostly the same in the next phase. In other words, they will continue to contribute towards creating CFDE resources and help build the necessary infrastructure to increase the use and reuse of Common Fund data and other digital resources. One thing that is for sure is that the number of engaged DCCs will continue to increase during phase 2, and the program will expand into new data type domains. I pass the presentation to Haluk, who will provide more details about the ROA.
Hello, everyone. I am Haluk Risat, one of the Common Fund Program Officers for the CFDE program. Thanks for joining the webinar. As George mentioned, I will provide some more details about the ROA. Purpose of this ROA is to establish the data resource and knowledge centers for the CFDE. At a very high level, the primary responsibility of the data resource center is twofold. First is to create and maintain the CFDE portal, which is the landing page or the front end for CFDE. Second is to create a data resource portal that will enable users to query and use the datasets and other digital resources from across Common Fund programs. Along the same lines, the primary responsibility of the Knowledge Center is to create a knowledge network to integrate knowledge generated by the Common Fund programs. It will create the knowledge portal, enabling users to query and access the integrated knowledge and encompassing this network resources. The progress of these centers will be assessed by evaluating the robustness and growth of the user community for the developed portals and other CFD resources with enhanced utility over time. Next slide, please. Requirements from the planned centers are discussed extensively in the ROA. Therefore, we will not cover the details in this webinar and refer you to the ROA document. To provide some highlights, the main responsibilities of the Data Resource Center include establishing the CFD portal, which is the front page for the ecosystem, establish the Data Resource Portal as a component of the portal that will serve as the resource for Common Fund generated datasets, tools, and digital resources. And it will also allow for inquiry and use of those datasets and resources. And establish the necessary mechanisms to import the datasets, identify and search to CFD workspaces for use in analysis. The Data Resource Center is expected to provide leadership to standardize how metadata, data, and digital resources are handled in the ecosystem. The center team is also expected to liaise with other relevant NIH efforts such as NCPI and RAS, and with community-wide efforts such as FIRE and GFRGH. Next slide, please. Highlights of the responsibilities of the Knowledge Center include establishing the Knowledge Portal, which will be the knowledge network platform for CFDE. The Knowledge Center is expected to provide leadership to standardize the handling of knowledge generation, harmonization, and integration efforts within the CFDE community, and also establish links to non-Common Fund knowledge resources to amplify the value of Common Fund generated knowledge. The center will also help enabling users to access knowledge resources through CFD workspaces for use in analysis. Next slide, please. As portals will be the major products of the established centers, let me briefly go over their relationship and expect connections among various centers. The CFD portal will house some training and user guidance material and work closely with the Center for Training to maintain such material and house or provide links to Center for Training generated material through the portal. The portal will have a similar role for CFD tools. In other words, it will provide tutorials and or guidance material about the CFD tools and provide access to those tools either directly through the portal or provide the links from where the tools can be accessed. The portal team will also work very closely with the Integration and Coordination Center to organize and widely disseminate CFD consortium material. One significant component of the portal will be the resource portal, which houses the information about the Common Fund datasets and other digital resources and knowledge generated by the Common Fund programs. The resource portal will be established by integrating the data resource portal and the knowledge portal to be established by respective centers. We briefly discussed this in the previous slides, so we will not repeat them. The key point, however, is that our program is looking for creative ideas in this ROA, where data resource and knowledge portals can either be developed and implemented as an integrated platform from the start, or they can be developed in tandem, but separately and integrated when they are ready for merging. For the latter case, if the two portals are to be developed independently, strong coordination between the teams will need to start with the design phase. Therefore, applicants are required to describe how they will approach the integration in their proposals. Lastly, the portal will enable the users to port the datasets and knowledge identified in query of the resources to CFD workspaces for analysis and use in application studies. The center teams will work with the Cloud Workspace Implementation Center to achieve this. Next slide, please. Regarding the ROA details, there are a few key points that you might be worth bringing to your attention. Applicants can form teams to apply to establish both centers. In this case, provide how the integration between these components will be accomplished. Also, provide the timeline. Applicants are required to provide budgets for the two centers separately. In other words, delineate the budget to define the costs associated with each center and the costs needed for integration purposes. Or applicants can propose establishing either the data resource center or knowledge center. In this case, applicants are required to provide the plans for how the integration can be achieved, its expected timeline, and what will be needed from the other center for achieving the integration. Also provide details for risk factors and potential solutions, and how to evaluate whether the portals are ready for integration. Next slide, please. Applicants are not required to submit a letter of intent, but it is strongly recommended. The due date is April 28. Letter of intents will be reviewed by NIH staff only to assess eligibility. LOI is helpful to NIH to speed up the review process by identifying conflicts of interest for potential reviewers ahead of time. Please note that NIH will not be providing feedback about the scientific and technical content for improvements. Next slide, please. Full proposals are due May 30th. As Section 10.3 of the ROA discusses, applications will consist of multiple components. These are listed in the ROA. These components must be provided as separate individual documents, and they must be titled using the section names listed in the ROA. The application form has specific fields for the components of the leadership plan, abstract, and specific aims. Please use those fields to attach those respective sections. All other components should be included as attachments to the attachment field of the application form. Please also note to leave the budget justification out of the budget form. The budget form is a field for attaching the budget justification. Do not, I stress, do not use that field because the attachment does not get included when the PDF for the budget is flattened. Instead, provide the budget justification as one of the attachments in the application form. Page limits for those components are stated in the ROA. Please take a look at the ROA for the page limits indexes. Next slide, please. There is a PI eligibility restriction that we would like to bring to your attention. CFDE has released the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Integration and Coordination Center. The opportunity number for that Notice of Funding Opportunity is RFA-RM-23-002. The PI, including co-PIs and multiple PIs for the data resource or knowledge centers, will not be eligible to serve as the PI or a multiple PI of the Integration and Coordination Center. That means that while applicants can apply to both the data resource and knowledge center opportunity, as well as the ICC opportunity, the PI or PIs awarded the data resource and knowledge centers will become ineligible to receive the ICC award. If you have any questions concerning your eligibility, don't hesitate to get in touch with our team and we can discuss your issues and concerns. Next slide, please. I would like to bring an upcoming webinar about this ROA to your attention. Our grants management colleagues and our program team arranged a webinar about how to submit a proposal in response to this other transaction research opportunity announcement. Our grants management colleagues will provide information about the steps of the submission process and answer submission-related questions in that webinar. We encourage you all to attend that webinar, which will be held on May 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And please encourage your grants management colleagues to attend. Next slide, please. We thank you for listening to this presentation that covered some of the key aspects of the issued ROA. Additional information can be found at the Frequently Asked Questions website, commonfund.nih.gov/data-ecosystem/FAQs. Link to it is also provided in the ROA. Or you can contact our team at the listed email address, cfde@od.nih.gov, with your questions. With that, we can move to question and answer part of the webinar. Please post your questions to the chat box. Okay, now the floor is open for questions.
Okay, I see we have one question in the chat box. Can we learn something more about the review process?
Sure. The applications will be reviewed for scientific content, and then there are different categories for the review criteria. Those are listed in the ROA, and then after the scientific review, there's applications also will go to the programmatic review by our team, and then after that, for a subgroup of the applications that might be selected to go to the next step, we will start the discussions with the project teams to get more information about their applications, as well as discussing how we can maybe improve the applications to make it to make it address the requirements in a better way, things like that. So with other transaction awards, there is the typical review process. On top of that, there is what we call the discussion or negotiation phase for the project milestones and tasks and so on. So that's going to be for a subgroup of applications that are going to be selected to go forward to that next stage. But in the first stage, all the applications are going to go through scientific and programmatic review.
So we have another. Thank you, Haluk. I think we have two more sort of review-related questions. In the review process, are single applications for either the Data Resource Center or the Knowledge Center disadvantaged versus double applications for both? What would happen if the review committee likes one side of a double application and not the other?
So in that case, there is certainly not going to be any disadvantaged review. So, but in case if the review really likes one component and may not like the other one, there is going to be possibility for discussions on that, whether we might form teams from different applications, such that the liked component might get teamed up with another application to form teams to go ahead with the center awards. In that case, it's going to be a possibility for discussions like that, whether the team is going to be open to discussions whether to accept one of the centers instead of both of them that they applied for. So in other words, there might be a kind of a selection for mixing and matching for different applications, but it's of course going to get discussed with the teams, and this teams needs to agree on that agreement. Agree on that arrangement before we can move forward.
Great, thanks, Luke. And then the second review-related question was, is there going to be a standard review panel?
No, these are like we are going to be forming a review panel within our we are going to be forming a review panel from either the NIH colleagues or other federal employees, and so it's not going to be like the review panels that the Center for Scientific Review organizes. These are you can think this like a spatial emphasis panels just for this application.
Okay. Next question, is there an existing or preferred enterprise software capability in place for these portals?
Right now, no. So in other words, there is no existing enterprise software capability in place for these portals, but we are open to ideas for that. So in other words, you can propose that if you like. But there are you may want to take a look at terms and conditions part of the ROA for the IP rights, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Will the data resource portal be a subset or operate under the CFDE portal?
Eventually, yes. So as discussed in one of the slides, we would like to end up with a single portal that's going to encompass all the other portals for the ecosystem. In other words, the data resource portal and as well as the knowledge portal will go under the CFDE portal. But in terms of how those can be incorporated in the CFDE portals, kind of we are open up for ideas for that as well. In other words, there might be just a whole portal might get included in the CFDE portal, or there might be some form of a linkage between the portals that the data resource might stay as on its own portal, but operating under the CFDE portal. In other words, like how strong the link should be is we are leaving it open for ideas. So we are looking for good ideas for that. But eventually we are going to end up with a single product, single portal. George, would you like to add something like that? Or?
Oh, no, I'm just coming back on camera. That's all.
Yeah. Eventually we want to end up with a single portal, but how to incorporate the data resource portal and the knowledge portal, we are really looking for ideas for that, good ideas.
Next question, are there any funding targets for data and knowledge centers?
If I can refer the questioner to page 5, we addressed the issue. First year, the total will be $3 million. For years 2 through 5, up to $3.5 million. And first year funding for either the DRC or the KC individually is not expected to exceed $1.750 million, with no more than $3 million for both awards.
Okay. Is the competition limited to CFDE engaged or common fund data coordinating centers?
No, it's open to everyone. So it's an open competition.
Right.
There's no limitation.
And that includes academic and commercial.
Exactly. And please remember, there are some PI eligibility restrictions for like applying for this portals, this centers as well as ICC. So that's the only limitation.
The Data Resource and Knowledge Center PIs cannot serve as the ICC PI. Is vice versa true?
Correct. Why the vice versa is true as well. So, in other words, the PI for the ICC will not be able to serve as the PI for the DRC or KC.
A great sense of community has emerged among DCCs through multi-DCC partnerships with funding for each participating member. Do you have any recommendations on structuring the coordinating centers to continue to enhance community collaboration with and among the DCCs interfacing with the centers? In particular, how does one avoid having a coordinating center that requires unfunded effort from data coordinating centers to be successful?
So in that case, our plans for the next phase is that we are going to continue to engage DCC through partnerships or through the centers and so on. In that case, that's continue to happen. But we are looking for also ideas for like how we can improve that process. Like in other words, if we have ideas that you can suggest for the centers, how we can better integrate centers to the DCCs, we are looking for ideas like that. And open for like open for ideas that how we can in terms of how we can improve that. So,
and if I could add, we're making sure that all partners are engaged, and in order to be engaged, some funding is required, and we recognize that fact. So,
which is currently the case. So,
that is all the questions I see in the chat. If there are any others, please we'll take a minute, we'll pause and take a moment. Yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat or.
And a brief reminder, there is the outlet for using the mailbox at CFDE at od.nih.gov that we showed on the slide, and is also in the OT information for you to contact us. To make sure that parties are treated fairly, we will share the answers that are applicable through the updated FAQ page. So be aware that those identities obviously will be removed, but we will be sharing the questions that come in. If they're a broad question, we'll try to strip out the details, but have the specifics relevant for everybody, so that everybody is equally able to have that information.
And we are, of course, going to strip your names and so on. We are not going to list your names on the FAQ site. So those questions and answers will be provided anonymously. So. any other questions, you can just come online and ask if you like. So. Yeah, we really hope that you all are going to apply, and then we are looking forward to your applications in this. Again, like, we are going to have this webinar for the grant submission process. And if your grants management colleagues have questions about the submission process, please encourage them to attend that webinar. And applying to other transaction awards is a little bit different than applying for regular NIH R grants or U grants. So in that sense, if they have any questions, they can attend that webinar and ask their questions.
And that would be of particular interest to commercial firms or people, as Huluk has said, who aren't using the traditional grants process at NIH. We want to make sure that we explain the process to you as well, so that you could enter the information into the system for your bid and consideration.
And another thing to add is like partnerships within the commercial entities and the academic entities are completely okay. So you can form partnerships with between the academic and commercial entities as well. No restrictions there.
I believe, Huluk, there is a restriction to U.S. Registered entities.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So if there are no other questions, maybe we can end early, I guess. Any last takers? Any questions? Okay. Thanks for attending them. Again, we are looking forward to your submissions. So.
And here to answer your questions.
Exactly. And if you have any questions, as we mentioned, like, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, either using the email or just use the CFDE email that's on the slides and the ROA. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for attending.